Can you be anti-Zionist without being anti-Jewish? No. You have to understand, one of the biggest parts of anti-Semitism or anti-Jewishness that goes back hundreds or even thousands of years was to create complete lies about the damage that the Jewish people were doing to a society. So because they were always a minority in every country after they got just kicked out of their own land by the Romans in 70 AD, they were scattered across the world. They lived in almost every other country on earth, always as a small minority, but always as a very successful minority. And because they always focused on education and hard work and success to get ahead, not on conquering, not on bullying, not on attacking other people, but because they were always very successful very quickly, but also a minority, they were always looked at very skeptically, and the superstitious medieval mind would scapegoat them, would blame them for all the problems in the land. But you couldn't just blame them by saying they're more successful than us in a short time. That would make you look dumb. So they had to create all kinds of elaborate lies about them. And that's where the word blood libel comes from. In the medieval times, they would make these lies that Jewish matzah, the flatbread that's used to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Passover, could only be made by killing Christian children and squeezing their blood into the dough. Like ridiculous lies like this, but people believed it, and it would cause whole groups of mobs to brutally destroy whole Jewish villages and rape and murder and pillage. And there were many other lies like this. Now, recently in the West, it's become very unfashionable to hate Jewish people because racism is considered one of the biggest evils of all. And so, of course, the dignified, civilized man would never hate a whole group of people just for their identity. So they wouldn't hate Jewish people. But it's easy to hate Israel and to be anti-Zionist. What does Zionism even mean? People think Zionist has all these weird connotations about Jewish superiority or Jews wanting to take over the world. Literally ask any Jewish person who has any interest at all in Israel. Zionism means the belief that Jewish people should have the right to their ancestral homeland and to be able to defend themselves and live peacefully without being attacked by the outside world. That is the entire definition. And there's no superiority. There's no desire to take over the rest of the world. Now, can you criticize Israel and still be not anti-Jewish? Of course, you can criticize every country on earth. Every country has flaws and every country makes mistakes. But you have to criticize them on a fair set of templates, the way you would criticize every other country. And if you compare every other country on earth with the human rights violations, with the commitment to peace and prosperity, Israel scores pretty near the top as far as being a great country that contributes a lot and doesn't contribute negative things to the world. But if you will repeat the lies that Israel is a colonial country, that they were founded by kicking out the Palestinians, like complete lies. And if you won't even bother looking into the history and finding out why they're lies, first of all, almost half of all Israelis are Middle Eastern brown Jews who lived in the Middle East for hundreds of years, some of them before Arabs ever entered those different lands. They're from Yemen, they're from Iraq. Over 10,000 Jews alone lived in what was later be called Palestine long before Arabs ever moved in. And no people were ever called Palestinian up until 1964, 19 years after Israel is already established. Secondly, Israel didn't come in and grab land from Palestinians and bully them. They bought land from the Turks at a high price since 1880, land that nobody wanted. Swamp and desert. They drained the swamps, malarial swamps. At one point, they were listed as the worst malarial swamps in the world, and terrible desert where you couldn't grow anything. They developed drip irrigation to irrigate the desert and build farms. This is what caused hundreds of thousands of Arabs to flood into the land looking for work opportunities. So here you have these Jews, these pioneers coming and revitalizing a land that nobody wants to live in. Because in the late 1800s, the land had become almost completely barren and empty. It was down to like 5% of its capacity. There were still Arab villages and there were Jewish villages. Those Jewish villages and Arab villages had been there for hundreds of years. And those Arab villages would attack the Jewish villages periodically in massacres. You can look them up on Wikipedia. Look up the rape of Safad as just one example. That was, I think, in 1834, before there was any talk of a Jewish nation in Palestine. But anyway, in the late 1800s, these enterprising Jews, tired of being persecuted all over the world, they flooded back to Israel and they began to buy up land, and they peacefully tried to coexist with the Arab villages, and the Arab villages were not happy about it because in Islam, to have another religion, especially Christian or Jewish, one of the hated religions, take over a land that once belonged to Muslims is considered the greatest sin of all. And so it was completely religious hatred. It wasn't that the Jews were taking land. They weren't kicking anybody off. What happened was, finally, when there were enough Jews converged there and Turkey lost control of the land at the end of World War I, in 1918, England was given control of the land with a mandate to create a Jewish state. But instead of doing it right away, England kind of sat on their heels and they let the Jewish and Arab villages keep attacking each other, to everybody's frustration. And finally, after the Holocaust, the UN took over and said, that's it. We got to give these people a state because they're not safe anywhere in the world. And they've been spending the last 75 years building this tiny country into something habitable that it wasn't before. So we owe it to them. And the UN granted the land to be divided, half into a Jewish state, half into an Arab state. That wasn't even what it was supposed to be. The whole thing was supposed to be a Jewish state, but they gave half of it as an Arab state, and those Arabs rejected their half. The Jews accepted their half. Why would the Arabs reject their half? Because the surrounding Arab nations told them, stick with us and we'll help you get the whole land, and we'll kill all the Jews. We'll kick them off of all these villages, all of these new cities, all of these new farms they developed for the last 75 years. We'll raid and pillage and steal them all, and you will have them all. There'll be not a single Jew left in the land. We will kill them all if you stick with us. And so these Arabs, half of them fled to join the armies of these 5 surrounding Arab nations to try to kill all the Jews. Now, a call went out for these devastated Jews from all around the world, and Jewish people around the world began to pour in relief funds and buy up all the old dilapidated military equipment from all around the world from past wars and send it over there. And by some ridiculous miracle, they managed to fight back and win. But when they won, do you think they're going to give back those homes to those traitorous Arabs who had just abandoned their homes to let the other Arab armies march through and commit a second Holocaust? Of course, they weren't going to let them back. Now, the funny thing is, a large portion of the Arabs didn't flee, didn't attack the Jews. They wanted to be peaceful. They wanted to coexist with the Jews. And what happened to them? They became Israeli citizens with full rights. To this day, 22% of Israelis are full-blooded Arabs who have full rights. Not only do they have full rights to vote, they hold office, political office, but they actually own media companies, news stations, and banks. And it's probably gone up and down, but a few years ago, last I checked, there were 3 seats on the Knesset held by Arabs. The Knesset is Israel's version of a Congress or parliament. We can go way, way more into all the details of the further wars where all these surrounding Arab nations tried again and again to defeat Israel, and they were beaten back worse every time because as Israel began to develop their military and get stronger and stronger, and they had some of the best scientists in the world now moving in, it pretty soon became so impossible to defeat the Israelis that finally the Arabs realized they needed to rely on another tactic. And that's where the Russian communists taught them about propaganda. And so all of the new Palestinians, coining that term for the first time, giving themselves this new name, were just Arabs before that. Most of them had Jordanian or Egyptian passports. They weren't any separate nationality, but they decided to make themselves this new nationality, and they decided to wage a propaganda war. So because they couldn't beat Israel in a conventional war, they spent the next 50 years, from about 1975 until today, trying to convince the rest of the world that Israel is the aggressor, that they're the evil ones, that they're not some tiny little people just wanting to survive and just wanting peace, which is the truth. No, they are the big, bad, evil monsters. And now that Israel had grown an incredible military, one of the best intelligence services in the history of the world, the Mossad, because they had to stay alive with all of their enemies, suddenly it wasn't too hard for the West to look at them and say, wait a minute, maybe they are the aggressors. And look at these poor Palestinians all in hunger and suffering. And the reality is there have been so much aid given to Palestinians over the last 50 years that some people estimate every man, woman, and child at one point could be a millionaire almost if they just used the money to build up their own lands. And Israel continually would give them portions of land to have as their own. And as soon as they did, all the Palestinians would do was build military infrastructure and turn their every bit of land into a war zone where they could launch rockets and missiles into Israel's civilian population. This has been going on for 50 years. It's been going on for, 100 years, but this latest brand of propaganda has been going on for 50 years. But it worked. They developed an entire Hollywood-level studio where they dress up Arabs in Israeli uniforms and have them commit atrocities with fake blood and all kinds of crazy stuff, and paid actors. And then they send the films around Europe. And especially the left really likes the idea of an underdog struggling against a mighty imperialistic power. Well, Israel used to be the underdog. The Jews were the underdog up until about 1975. And then it flipped. Once Israel had some power to defend themselves, suddenly they're not the underdog anymore. Suddenly these poor Arabs are the underdog. So they bought this whole lie that these Arabs were just peaceful, poor people who just wanted to live, just wanted to survive, when literally they were the ones making war constantly. So if you refuse to look into the history of this, as I've explained it, and verify the things I've said, you can look it up on Wikipedia. You don't even need to look at a biased source. Israel has always been on the defense. They have never been the aggressor. They have never pushed anybody or kicked anybody off their land. They weren't kicking people off their land. They were just refusing to let people return who had left their land willingly to start a war. So the idea that Israel is the aggressor, and now to even say that they're committing genocide and famine, which is so over-the-top ridiculous lies, because the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, goes above and beyond to avoid civilian casualties more than any other army on earth. Just to fight against the propaganda, they try so desperately hard not to kill civilians. Meanwhile, the Palestinians are dressing up as civilians. They're hiding behind civilians. They're putting all of their rocket launchers on the roofs of schools and hospitals, drawing Israeli fire to their most innocent civilians. When Israel drops leaflets saying there's going to be an attack here in 48 hours, everybody needs to vacate, the Palestinian leaders will block the roads and keep the people in that area where they know the airstrikes are going to come, because their leaders are so evil. They want their own people dead, because the more dead Palestinians, the more the money flows in and the more they win the propaganda war. They will sacrifice all their people to win this propaganda war, because they believe it's a religious war and they believe they will receive rewards in heaven. And meanwhile, the leaders don't even live in the area. They live in Qatar and parts of Europe in these giant mansions. A lot of the leaders have literal billion-dollar bank accounts from all the money that was supposed to help the Palestinians that came in from around the world. So those are the facts. You can dispute them. You can say this is crazy. But if you don't bother to really read up on it and look into it and verify if what I'm saying is true or not, and you just blanket say that Israel is evil and you're anti-Zionist, you are anti-Jewish. There's no other way around it, period.